Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to Midnight Dark Stories. The night is deep, the stars are hidden, and it's the perfect time for us to gather here and dive into the mysterious and thrilling world of tales. Prepare to be spellbound as we uncover the secrets that lie in the darkness. Let's begin this enchanting journey together. For context, I live in a very small trailer court, and directly next to us is a railway that goes across the whole state and leads to a wally world. If you head down for like 20 minutes now. I was a teenager in 8th grade at the time, with no car or transportation other than a bike. The railroad tracks go in a straight line directly leading to Walmart. So if I were to bike to the Walmart, it takes me about the same time as if I walk straight down the tracks. So more often than not I would walk, as I was never really a big fan of riding bikes, as I have had back issues since a young age. Now on this date in particular, I decided to head to Walmart for dumb kid stuff shortly before the sun was about to set. Basically, I went to the store and got distracted just looking around, bought some food and drink and some trading cards, but left as the sun was going down. It's about a 20 to 25 minute walk home, and I decided to head down the tracks again at about a 10-minute mark. It was getting very dark and I was a generally fearful and anxious child due to my autism. I was scared of the dark until at least about 14 and a half and would often have nightmares or see things that weren't there in my closet, or dark corners, etc. So as it became too dark to see, I was getting extremely nervous and hyper-vigilant. 5 minutes later, I could have sworn that I was hearing footsteps crunching in the rocks lining these tracks that weren't mine. I stopped a few times to listen and confirm that someone was walking towards me from a significant distance away. I couldn't see them at this point because of the darkness and lack of lighting across the railroad tracks. I had no phone or flashlight of any kind either. I started freaking out internally. At first I didn't know what to do, but as the sound of the footsteps got closer, I decided to call out and let them know that I was coming towards them. I stopped as I did this and said something along the lines of, "Is someone there?" Well, I know that this might seem silly. As an adult, I was used to my brain playing tricks on me in the darkness, and at first I was convinced I was hearing things and there was no response. At this point the footsteps were getting closer, but still difficult to distinguish over my own. So I stopped the footsteps. They continued for a brief moment, and then they stopped too. I called out again and I said, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response again. I was still prepubescent, and I had a child's voice at the time, and I feel like any reasonable adult would have responded and said yes or yeah, "I'm just walking," or whatever, as I had genuine, noticeable fear in my voice. After I received no response again, I told myself that I was just imagining it and continued on my journey at this point, being just under 15 minutes from my house. And then I heard them again, footsteps coming closer. As soon as I started walking, fear took over now and I started yelling and making whooping sounds, thinking that it might be some sort of an animal. I yelled things like, "I know you're there and I have a knife," which was total BS. But I thought that it might encourage this person to respond, but still nothing. A few times as I was speaking, I would hear the footsteps stop again. Finally, about 3 or 5 minutes later, stating multiple times that hearing these footsteps stop. Sorry, dudes. I can't give a super specific time frame. I was in total fight or flight mode, scared out of my mind. So it gets a little hazy from here. But I start seeing this guy materialize out of the darkness. He had on blue jeans, a dark hood with the hood completely masking his face from a distance. I was instantly relieved, for whatever reason. Relieved to know that I wasn't crazy. Maybe I don't know, and began verbal vomiting to this guy, and I was just scared and I didn't know that he was on the tracks. He again didn't respond, though. And this was before like mainstream Bluetooth audio and all that. And I didn't see any headphone cables even when I passed him. So it wasn't like he was just like ignoring me because he was listening to music or something, but because he didn't respond. I was eyeing him, Willy, as he approached, and we locked eyes at one point. I will never forget the chill that ran down my spine. He was staring at me coldly and blankly, with a menacing look in his eyes, like he was thinking about what to do. He had his hand shoved in his pockets, and as I was passing him, he looked like he was going to pull something out with his right hand. I was a very scrawny kid, and even though I did a back problem I was pretty quick. Still, I would just hurt from running for too long. But from then on, going down the tracks, I was a full sprint, and everything from this point on is just genuinely a blur. I know I tripped and felt twice as well as soaked myself in mud when I tried to get across the small ditch separating the track from the trailer park. But eventually I got home. I never told my mom, and I never walked on those tracks at night again after that. But the tracks, they're on an elevated hill next to the trailers, and you can either walk a minute in the wrong direction to get on it, that I live on, or you can cut through this one spot where some people had put a board down for that exact purpose to get across the ditch and onto the tracks. The board, it was broken in half and partially submerged, so it was kind of like you had to sort of jump and land on the board with one foot and then kick off to the other side of the ditch. It's maybe about 350 across, so it's not a huge jump, but it always has nasty standing water in it. Once you get on the tracks, there's a super long stretch with absolutely no way off to other than private property of a factory. The railway delivers goods to which you can get in trouble for trespassing on, obviously, but then there's a junction about 20 minutes down and another 5 minutes from there, which is where this Walmart is. Due to this, I couldn't just get off the tracks when I ran away. I had to get to the ditch before I would be able to. I recently had an unexplainable experience that I really don't know whether to classify as paranormal, creepy, or just really weird, because it feels like it sort of hits on all of them. I guess, to preface this, but keep an open mind that anything could be possible. But unless there is definitive proof from others or myself of such things, I won't believe such things are reality. With that said, here's what happened. So my colleagues and I were staying at a B in a rural part of Louisiana for a business trip. And on my final day there, I decided to explore the property of the owners. The property is a 26-acre plot of land, and the owners are also biologists and have created numerous trails and naturalist exhibits around the property that people will often explore. Something my colleagues and I were trying to do during our trip was to get to the creek that is on the property. It turns out it's far behind the house, through dense woods. I would say about 3/4 of a mile behind the house and half a mile through a dense forest. After my sea workers tried and couldn't find the creek due to a number of reasons, fire, mounds, mosquitoes, and simply not finding it, I thought that I would try and find it to give me something to do. I'm very experienced in the outdoors, and bushwhacking is nothing new to me really, and I knew that I would likely find it. With enough time and determination, I asked the owners the best way to get to the creek, and they gave me a trail to go on, but said that it would be unlikely for me to get to it because of down trees from Hurricane Laura, which turned out to be the case in the end. Regardless, though, I followed the trail they described, which ends at what I can best describe as an insect observation station. It's a cotton fabric attached to poles and a light on the top so people can go and see the insects attracted to it. After this station, it's immediately woods, with small barbed fences that you hop over to start your journey anyway. Long story short, I get through the woods and found the creek after traversing down logs and walking through wetlands and bushes, and this is where things got weird. So after I get to the creek, I noticed a storm coming in overhead that I knew it was time to go back. I start my way back, and that was when I heard a voice very briefly, but I absolutely knew it was somebody talking. I couldn't make out what was said, but I froze and closed my eyes to focus on hearing, but heard nothing. No wig snapping, no voices rustling, nothing. But I knew something wasn't right, and I quickly started making my way back to the point at where I had come in, which was easier said than done in the end. But on my way back I heard something else, a giggle, and again I stopped, closed my eyes and didn't hear anything again. I'm now over the situation, though, and feeling completely uneasy. I focused on getting back to the insect station. I get back and hop the fence to the trail, and almost immediately I just got goosebumps all over my entire body, uncontrollably, as if I was freezing. I continued back to the house and luckily didn't hear or see anything, and went back inside and went to sleep. End of story. However, to add to this, all my colleague mentioned earlier, when they went back there, that they had heard twigs snapping with the weight of a human. They called out to whatever was out there, but they got no response and didn't hear anything else. They too are pretty experienced in the outdoors, but I thought that it could have been a deer, so I didn't give it much thought. But now I don't know about that. I don't know what I experienced, and I don't know if I could say it's paranormal, but I would really appreciate if people could provide insights, because I just don't know what to think of it. This started just like any other afternoon. I had just come home from the gym and I had just eaten when my friend called me and asked if I wanted to take a ride on my motorcycle. This is something that we do a lot, where we just sort of head out and drive around with good music and good vibes. And since it was really hot and a nice day, it couldn't fit any better really. So I grabbed my helmet, keys, and I headed to him. At first we drove around a bit and just sort of vibed to some white girl music and lived life in the heat. As I was running low on fuel, we were about to head back when he suddenly pointed out a seemingly normal gravel path leading into the forest. As we had nothing better to do, we started to descend the trail, which was pretty steep. It was so steep that my friend had to jump off for a bit while I drove up. When we reached more plain grounds, we decided that I should drive forward a bit just to see if there was anything to see or if it was just a dead end of some random house or something. I started to drive ahead a bit and was first met by a wavy sort of G-rally path for a while, until there on the left side was an opening in the trees revealing a trail which had quite fresh tire marks. I thought that was a bit odd, but thought nothing of it really, and I just continued forward when suddenly, on the trail in front of me, maybe 10 feet away, I saw a man standing by a car as the road curved. The sight was sort of blocked, so he couldn't see me, but I could see out of his shape and some details that he was there. He looked to be in his 30s, I would guess, and with a black cap and gray zip up. I, at this point, started to think that maybe we were on private property. However, there were no signs at all indicating that. I, however, decided to turn around in any case and head back to my friends so that we could go before the man by the car would manage to drive out. After unknowingly not knowing that we were there and maybe spot us on the way out, I drove back to my friend, who was a little bit tired, having to walk up with his helmet on, and I told him about the guy that was further up the road. We were just sort of standing there talking about following the trail into the woods on the left by foot, when we saw the headlights of the car approaching from where the car had been at that point. We just sort of came out of there, and he practically jumped onto my motorcycle and we drove away. As we were heading back down the trail, the car approached us rapidly and was soon right on my tail. We both felt that it was time to go and I pulled out onto the main road just to have the car copy our turn. I saw a smaller road that I had taken before. That led to a bicycle path, which I took us down on, and, as we looked back, we could see the car come to a complete stop on the road before slowly driving away. I know that this incident by itself may not be that disturbing, and it really isn't. I guess it was just a bit of fun, I suppose, but the disturbing part of it is that we wanted to see the end of the road without having to go back again. So we looked it up on Google Earth, and what we found there is the really disturbing part. We found the road But when we looked at the pictures, which must have been old because of the photos, there were like multiple houses on the side of the road and which looked to be in really good shape, with newly mowed grass and a caravan park next to it. And all that. Obviously that was now not the case, but the situation, however, was pretty odd, as there was a lot of trash on the ground and what looked to be clothes spread around on the ground next to the gravel path. Something even weirder was that when I clicked along the path to see the end of the road, it was all blurred out and you couldn't see what was hidden behind it. I could show the pictures, I guess, from Google Earth right now, but since I didn't get any pictures of the road when we were there, I would really have no proof or anything. However, me and my friend did return this week, and we tried to get some pictures of where the houses were on Google Earth and what lies at the end of the road. There was a bit of a hasty change in plans, and me and my friend and another guy decided to head back to the place again today. Instead, I probably should have taken the advice of some people on being wary of returning, but something weird is definitely going on over there. It's almost like the forest and the path change, and the road had different paths. This time, the biggest problem is that there is a cat in there now too, and I just cannot wrap my head around that. When we were there last time, we stood right where it was today, and it's not new. It looks like it had been there for ages. It is well kept, though, which is strange. A new roadblock had appeared, blocking the path to the final part of the trail as well. We took the car there this time and we had to walk the last bit since we couldn't get past the barrier. And as we walked, I had a really weird, odd sort of déjà vu feeling. I could have sworn that I looked over my shoulder at least 10 times. At the end of the path, an anonymous-looking building, surrounded by a giant fence, was there. Next to the building was a camouflaged radar and must have been connected to the building. You did not wanting to reveal myself and to not get into trouble with a higher power, I refrained from photographing the building, but there was a Defense Department sign stating that doing so was highly illegal and I didn't want to risk anything over scary story. We came out of there pretty fast though before returning to the roadblock, and we investigated the cabin that appeared out of seemingly nowhere. My friend went forward and looked in through the window, as I had an eerie feeling about the whole thing. He looked for a second, and then he took off running. I obviously followed suit, and he just said to get into the car quickly as we drove off. He explained that the inside looked fake and the fake fixed, and that he also saw a cup of coffee sitting on a table. He said that something was really off about it, and that it sort of looked staged, was his words. In any case, we took off in the car and we headed out onto the main road again. But I'm in a right now and I don't know if I want to return or if I should stay away from there. We also investigated a bit around the house and found a couple of footprints from a boot and some other things. And, like I said, I'm just torn right now. So does anyone have an explanation for what this could be? Or is it just something weird happening? If you have any theories as to what this all could be, then I would genuinely love to know. Also, this is going to sound a bit like a rant, and it very much is, but I'm sitting here now and don't know where to go with this. So I look close at Google Earth images and there's a whole house and its lawn has been wiped off with the radar. The house we found was one of 3, all in similarity to the one that we found, and everything just seems wrong about this place. I get a bit agitated and panicked when I look at the map, because it's just so wrong and it just doesn't look right. Everything is different, and I think I need to go back to find the other houses, and this time I'm determined to get some pictures. This story is from my childhood, and look, I know that this is a strange one, but I'm just wondering if anyone has heard of anything like this before. So when I was 16, me and my friend, we went out to a park one day. It was a cold, snowy day. So we did what any rational teen would do and ventured into a sewer pipe where it was nice and warm. And we walked a ways into this pipe. It was quite notorious for. My friend group did a little bit of graffiti in one of the grass, where light shone through, then walked back to sit at the entrance together and talk. It was around this time that we heard a grating of metal against concrete. You would naturally assume at this point that it's a manhole being very slowly dragged across the street and open for somebody else to come in. We heard this, mentioned it, and shunned it. For the most part, ignored it. The sounds, they continued, though, like metal against concrete. Eventually I catch something out of my peripheral. My friend is already focused on that direction too. And when I look, I first see the water in the pipe splashing. I'm curious, because it's the dead of winter. I mean, why would they move it like that violently end up is what I mean when I focus my eyes. That was when I see a hand and an arm, bleached as white as paper, moving back and forth, splashing the water up and down. This was the water where we just were, where we graffitied, and now a being was there, supposedly just out of nowhere, wider than any human I'd ever seen, anorexic and hidden by a shadow. I ask if he sees, and he says yes. He sees a bleached white arm splash in the water where we were, and that was all it took for me to zip the heck out of there quickly. He followed in tow not soon after, outside the pipe. He hesitates, though, and wonders if we should go back in, because he hasn't seen something like that before, and wonders what it was. I refused, though, and we eventually just continued with our day. Later in the week, I attempted to rationalize everything. Maybe all that hub about metal against concrete was the garbage man or mailman, and our eyes were just playing tricks on us. My parents eventually informed me that they don't come out on Sundays, though they would not have been in the neighborhood. I tell this story to other friends in town, and they recount seeing a creature of the same make, bleached, white, anorexic limbs, with circumstances beyond anything normal, including flashes of light and screams in the forest nearby, etc. Sometimes I wonder, what did I see that day? Should we have gone back? And if we did, what would we have seen? If anyone has any intel or some sort of lore or anything, then I would love to hear it. Anything similar I would genuinely love to know. Honestly, though, I've sort of come to terms with the fact that I probably will just never know, alright. A 41-year-old female lived in Montana, and a few years ago I was forced to relocate after my landlord decided to rent to her son. The community that I had lived in for 2 years has become incredibly expensive since 2018. Zero median home price. Unfortunately, I was forced to relocate to another city, and because of the unexpected move and associated costs, I moved in with a roommate. My roommate left eventually to pursue a better job prospect about 3 months after I'd moved in. Our unit was a triplex, so there were 2 gentlemen that inhabited the other units. I was never added to the lease, as the property manager required a full deposit, and I was just not in a financially healthy spot at the time. I remained in the unit for 1.5 years, on my own, paying the rent and the utilities. Eventually I became very good friends with the man in the unit closest to mine. His name was Devin, 52 and male. Devin was a disabled veteran in recovery, and I also am a veteran, so he held a bit of a soft spot in my heart. We shared meals, hung out, and discussed all of life's mysteries, and would look out for one another. Devin had gone to treatment for 6 weeks, and I had watched his cat while he was gone too. As it developed over the course of 1.5 years, Devin had expressed romantic interest. However, right from the beginning, I clearly informed Devin that I didn't share those feelings and we would never be more than just good friends. Devin seemed to be lonely, which made sense. However, I'm a person who requires alone time to recharge my batteries. I set strict boundaries for Devin, as he wanted to hang out all the time. I would catch him walking through the front yard multiple times a day to get the mail, which I believed was to see if I was outside, so that he could stop the chat when I would leave in the morning to go to work. Devin was always outside to tell me that I looked nice and to have a good day. and I eventually told him that all made me feel a bit uncomfortable and he should just send a text letting me know if he wanted to hang out sometime and wait for a response. There were a couple of times I yelled at him for sort of overstepping my boundaries. The first, I had just got home and pulled into my garage. I was on a phone call and had stayed in the car, and Devin looked through the garage window to see if I was home. I was annoyed, but didn't really think too much of it. The second, though, I was getting dressed in my room in the summer, so the window was cracked. I felt like this was safe, as the window was not in a place that anyone could be walking by, as it was on my patio at the back of the home. But I caught Devin peeking through and I completely lost it. I let Devin know that under no uncertain terms his behavior was inappropriate and that if he didn't respect my boundaries, we would no longer be friends. Last year, while I was still in the home, I had asked Dion to watch my dog for a couple of days, so I could go to a family event out of state. Devin was happy to help and I was genuinely very appreciative. Not long after I returned, I started to notice strange things in my home, but I really just thought that it was me. Like, for instance, I would be fairly certain that I had locked my door in the morning when I had left for work, but when I returned it would be unlocked. I would be sure that I'd shut off all the lights, but when I got home in the evening one would be on. I really just thought that it was absent-mindedness. But fast forward a couple of months and my mom became sick with cancer. My sister watched my dog while I went to tend to my mom. My sister reached out to me and she asked if anyone else had a key to my apartment. I let her know that she had the only spare key but asked why. Obviously, easily. Similarly, she had experienced the same issues with lights and locks. I had not shared my concerns with my sister prior to her communicating hers with me, as I really just doubted my own sanity. While I was out of town, I received a text message from Devin asking if I had a potato that he could borrow. I let him know that I was out of state with my mom, who was sick. Devin didn't reply, which was sort of out of character, but I had noticed a change in Devin's effect. He was more reserved than ever and less friendly towards me. I thought it probably had to do with my firm adherence to my boundaries, which was fine by me. I mean, he didn't have to like them, but he had to respect them. But when I got back to town one night, I stayed over at my sister's house after helping her move. As mentioned above, I was struggling financially, so I would carefully budget and plan my weekly meals. The morning before my sister's move, I had placed 3 pieces of bacon into a Ziploc bag to be used later for a BLT. When I returned the following morning, much to my disbelief, there were only 2 pieces of bacon. I held the bag in my hands, knowing that there had been 3, and it was at this point that I no longer doubted myself. I called my sister and let her know that someone had been getting into my house. I always keep the place locked, and the only logical thing that could have happened is Devin made a copy of my key. When he had watched my dog in the fall, my sister reminded me about the potato text, and the potato in the counter basket was now gone. I had enough information to be pretty certain that my neighbor had violated my trust and was no friend at all. However, I still wasn't afraid of him. I guess, as I mentioned, he's a disabled vet and was somewhat feeble and sort of sickly. I wasn't scared of a confrontation, but I immediately went to the hardware store and purchased a camera that streams to your phone. Once the motion detector has been activated, I placed it facing the side door where Evan would enter. It also had two-way audio capability. So my plan was that when Evan I started to enter my home again, I would see it and say over the camera something to the effect of "Get out of my house. Put the key you copied on the counter and never try to speak with me again, or I'll contact law enforcement." As I said, I was not on the lease and didn't want to be homeless, so I couldn't turn to the property manager for help, and Devin knew that too. Now in the evenings, I started placing a jug of cat litter and a kitchen chair in front of the door that I knew Devon was accessing the apartment from. But I never expected that he would attempt to come in while I was at home, and really he had only taken a piece of uncooked bacon and a potato. At this point, laying on the couch one night watching TV, I thought that I had heard something sliding on the floor in the laundry room where the door was, but I knew that there was no way that he would come in while I was home. My cat was running around playing, so I decided that it was probably just her, and I was being paranoid because of all that had happened. The next morning, while changing my laundry, I noticed that the litter and chair had been pushed 3 to 4. I checked the sensitivity of the camera, and I found that I was able to replicate by slowly opening the door like that, which means that Devon had tried to come into my home while I was there. But why? That morning I took bear spray into the shower with me while my knees knocked. Genuinely, I was terrified. I felt vulnerable and violated. Devon knew that. I knew now also, and he knew that I had placed a barrier in front of that door after that morning. He was never outside in the morning again, nor did he walk through the yard to get his mail. I obtained a firearm for protection, and I did make a police report. The police officer was annoyed with me, as I did not want him to approach Devon, as all Devon would need to do is report me to the property manager, and I would be homeless. I'm grateful that whatever he was up to was apparently thwarted that night. But the fact that he tried to come in while he knew that I was home, it genuinely gives me the heebie-jeebies. I do wonder if he went through my underwear, watched me while I slept at any point. Since my situation has greatly improved now, I ended up moving out shortly after to take care of my mom. I got my own place again a few months ago, and I will never put my trust in another neighbor for a pet house sitting ever again. It still blows my mind that I had some guy stealing from me and likely stalking me too. I guess this story just solidifies that one should always trust their gut. There were so many times that a red flag was screaming at me, and I just thought that I was being crazy, and stupidly I ignored it. Today I was listening to some scary stories, and it made me remember this event. At the time of this story, I was 14, and as well as being younger, I had developed crippling anxiety and depression. All I'll say is that I was, and still am, very vigilant about my surroundings. Now, on this day, I planned to stay the night at a friend's house. I had never stayed at her place before. It was always mine for you to understand this story. I do need to explain the layout of this house. It was located on a sloped hill, and when you drove down a steep road, the first part of the house you would see was big and expansive on. Honestly, it looked a bit like an old mansion. If you continue driving down, you would be met with the semi-room, and the other one was a bedroom and a small bathroom and kitchen. There were no doors inside, just a piece of cloth or beads to separate the bathroom entrance from the kitchen. My friend's room was the bedroom, and her mom lived in the other section with the bathroom or kitchen. The landlord of the property, he lived in the main house, the big mansion. And when I say that, I don't mean it lightly. I mean all you could see was expansive Australian forest. Australian rainforests are incredibly dense too, and if you tried to walk through, you would most likely receive some type of bite at some point, whether that be a spider, an ant, a leech, etc. So I'll cut to the first thing. It happened to me and my friend. We had walked into her mom's flat, I forget why, but I think we were either hungry or I was asking how to get reception because there was none at the time, and called out for her mom. She was in the bathroom, and as we walked past a small window, I heard yeah, coming from outside. I turned to my friend, and she looked at me the same way that I did. We were really confused. If her was in the bathroom, that was right in front of us. Why did we hear a male voice coming from right outside? We brushed this off so as not to scare ourselves and continued having fun in my friend's room. For a little more context, The landlord used half of her room as storage and blocked off the back section of the room with a tall shelf and a divider. There was a huge glass sliding door at the front of her room too, and in the blocked-off back section there was another door. You couldn't get to that door unless she squeezed through a section outside. Now, skipping forward a little bit to nighttime, me and my friend had to go to the bathroom, so we sink it out of her room and walked to her mom's flat. Her mom was fast asleep. Now we used the bathroom as quietly as we could and then we exited. As we were making the small walk back to my friend's room, we saw something out in the woods, a pair of eyes looking directly at us from behind a tree. We panicked and froze. I pulled out my phone and took a photo before we sprinted back into her room, locking the glass door behind us and drawing the curtains. It's not a reach to say that we were already freaking out. We looked at the photo and sure enough, when I brightened the image, there was what looked to be a man staring at us from the dark woods. Obviously we were extremely scared, but I called my mother, who was about an hour away, and she just sort of dismissed us. And so after that we were obviously scared, but it was a little comforting anyway. After a while we relaxed and chalked it up to our imagination, playing tricks on us. We pulled out my laptop and put on a movie. I forget which movie we watched, but it was some cheesy rom-com. I think in maybe 20 or 30 minutes into the movie we froze and paused it. There were footsteps crunching on the dry leaves, right outside of her room. We listened in horror as the footsteps moved through the tight alley that led to the back door. We both moved slowly, standing on the bed to look over the room divider. Our eyes were locked on the back door, and after a moment of complete silence it turned. The doorknob wiggled slowly before it became faster. The door couldn't be opened as it was jammed against objects that were in storage, and then it stopped. No more noise. We were crying, holding each other in our arms, trying to stay as quiet as we could. Then the footsteps slowly crunched on the leaves in the opposite direction, back to the front of her room. We both didn't hesitate now, and I reached for my phone. We called the police, and after trying to explain the situation to the operator on the other end, in tears the whole time, she told us a unit was being dispatched and to stay where we were. But then, as we were still crying and hyperventilating, we heard a phone ringing. It sounded like an old landline phone, one with harsh and loud beeping. It was coming from a landlord's mansion. We waited silently, listening to the drawn-out ringing of his phone. After what felt like at least 2 minutes, it stopped and we heard his voice as he talked to the operator. At this time we both noticed another thing, fingerprints on her window. These windows were slated glass that you could open and shut with a lever. Whoever left these prints, they reached up, cut their hand around the top of the glass and dragged their fingers on the dust, because it definitely wasn't there. Before soon the landlord walked to her mother's unit and had told her that the police called him. He seemed extremely upset and told her that he made sure that they didn't send a unit. Her mother came to her room and we explained the situation. Both the landlord and her mother didn't seem to be bothered by the fact that a man just tried to enter our room. After that, I couldn't stay the night and neither could my friend. We were too scared to spend another minute there. So I called my mom and she came to get us at around 11 p.m. to 12 p.m. We dropped my friend back the next day, and when we got there, her mother told us something that I don't think that I can pass up as coincidence. You see, the night that it happened, it was raining and there was a pretty strong wind, but nothing strong enough to do this. Next to her mother's unit, she had a pole that held beads and fairy lights and all that. During the night ride, after me and her were picked up, it had been knocked down. Keep in mind, this pole was literally embedded into the cement and tied to other items with zip ties as well. So like I said, there was no way that could have been the wind. I mean, that pole was pretty darn sturdy. I am still unsure of an explanation to all of this. I mean, it may have been her landlord, right? I'm not too sure about that. It also could have been just a random man. Either way, I'm absolutely certain that there was somebody out there that night. I'm a 25-year-old person renting a 4-bedroom house. One of my roommates is my boyfriend, and the other is my best friend of 10 years. Her name is Tracy. We've been looking for a new roommate, and because of the way that this situation turned out, we have determined that I'm no longer allowed to be in charge of looking for roommates, because I am not judgmental enough and I am known to just ignore red flags. I'll start from the beginning, though, which is the house showing. So our new prospective roommate showed up for the house showing and introduced himself. He definitely seemed strange at first, but I wrote it off as him just sort of being eccentric. The main red flag was that at some point he randomly said something to the effect of, "And I will not bring meth into your house because I'm not on meth. I hate drugs and I see them as a scourge on this entire country." I didn't ask, so I was immediately weirded out. But my boyfriend and the roommate who was moving out also met the guy, and they both thought that, apart from that, he seemed pretty normal. He didn't look like a stereotypical meth head by any means. His skin was clear and he was kind of chubby. We thought that maybe he thought I was a meth head because I look a little bit scary. I have green hair, a 1G septum, and 6 facial piercings. In addition, my roommate who was moving out turned out to be hiding a cat, which made the house stink like cat wee. Which, I've been told, is what meth smells like. Also, the town that this guy was coming from is known for meth and crack, and he seemed to be explicitly trying to get away from that town. So I thought that maybe he was afraid of ending up in a situation where he was living with drug addicts and was trying to suss us out that way. And so giving him the benefit of the doubt was my first mistake. Me and Tracy, we were both sort of wigged out about the entire thing, but we were kind of desperate for a roommate, and all of the other people responding to my listing either were not great fits or were even sketchier than this guy. So in the end we let him move in now. Skip to the move-in date. He brings an old man to help move his stuff. He then proceeds to make the old man move all of his things by himself up the stairs while he sits there, including a refrigerator by himself. The new guy signs the lease, and immediately after signing the lease he informs us that he did not introduce himself using his real name and proceeds to tell us his real name. This man was not transgender, so the only reason that I can think of is for why he initially gave us a fake name is probably so that he could avoid having us run a background check. After this I had to go to work, though. Throughout my shift, Tracy sends me a message that the guy is weird, but her responses are sort of vague, and I didn't find out what happened until I got home. But here's what she told me. So the new guy, he goes to the bar after signing the lease and comes back after being kicked out before 9 p.m. The bar that he went to is a biker bar that is notorious for being pretty rowdy. Honestly, it's pretty hard to get kicked out of there too. I mean, you pretty much have to be doing something pretty heinous, or you have to have been like creeping on a woman there in order to get kicked out. In any case, when he comes back, he is completely drunk, but the men there must have been intimidated by me. Is what he said sounds to me more like he was creeping. Before this, I told the new guy that our landlord is coming up the next day to fix some things in the house, but when the new guy came home, Tracy reminded him that our landlord was coming the next day, and he became extremely angry, to the point that he was flailing arms and she thought that he was going to start breaking things. Tracy was so uncomfortable that she almost went to go and wake up my boyfriend in the other room. Eventually, the new guy did calm down, however, and so she just left it at that. Now there's this beanbag that we have next to my couch, and Tracy was sitting on the beanbag with her legs sort of swung over the armrest of the couch. At first the new guy sat on the couch. He begins to read off poetry that he wrote for her an entire hour and a half before, all of which is literally just streams of consciousness about how he wants all junkies to die. Afterwards, he starts telling her how beautiful she is over and literally lays his head down between her legs. She's trying to ignore him and obviously trying to get him off her, and he won't stop asking her if she fell asleep. Every time she moves, he gets a little bit closer. Then he starts inviting her to his room for a beer. Eventually, she just gets up and goes to her room at 11 p.m. But this man, he had effectively harassed her for like 2 entire hours. I thought that was everything. But then she tells me that she sent the guy's picture to her mom, who then sent his picture to everyone. She knows because she's from the town that he was previously living in. And it turned out that he had been stalking Tracy's for an entire year and that he's banned from the bar that she works at because he goes there and threatens to kidnap her. She literally has to be escorted out not only by workers, but the customers escort her to her car sometimes. So obviously we tell our landlord. Luckily our lease hadn't been finalized yet, so he agreed to kick him out. I called my mom to come over and Tracy calls her brother for backup just in case things go south. Our landlord shows up and essentially tells him that he needs to leave and doesn't let the new guy get a word in. The new guy starts getting agitated, though, and then aggressive. So we called the cops and several officers showed up. Told the guy that he had no legal standing as there was no lease. He introduced himself to us with a fake name. Obviously, and he hadn't been there for a full 24 hours and that he had to get out. The guy had begged his sister to pick him up, and she was so unwilling to do it that she didn't agree until he offered to pay her $200. Mind you, it's only a 20-minute drive to where he was going. He left most of his stuff on our porch. When we went into his room, it smelled like cigarette smoking. There was an empty pack on the floor, including not 1 or 2, but 7 empty dried pepper cans and garbage and crusty socks everywhere. The entire situation had me so stressed out that I didn't even notice that he had also left a pair of shorts that he had put on in the middle of the house's main hallway, and that was also the first thing you see when you walk into the house. They were there for the entire day, allegedly even when he knew that the landlord was coming. They were still sitting there when he left as well, and I picked them up with a glove and put them on the porch for him to retrieve at some point. But who knows if or when he will retrieve his things, because he came back earlier, he touched his things like he was going to take them and then just immediately left. All I have to say after all of this is that I'm really relieved that we caught this before the lease was finalized, because this easily could have turned into a situation where me and Tracy had been sexually assaulted, or perhaps even worse. I've only told a few people about this incident that took place in the late 80s. I'm not looking for an explanation, nor can I offer any proof. I just want to share what my friend and I experienced in the autumn of 1987. So I grew up in one of the northernmost states in New England, about 2 hours away from the White Mountains and 45 minutes from our state's coastline. In a small working-class city, General Electric and a tannery were 2 of the largest employers. I think it was early October. The leaves started to change, but still on the trees. Local fairs underway and cool enough to rock my HS varsity jacket. I worked full-time and was saving up for my first car. '76 to do Chevy Nova Foned with a Pink Floyd tapestry to cover the huge tear in the back seat. My friend Joe and I worked in the same restaurant, and an older cook would buy us hard-earned libations and give us a ride home. Really, he would just drop us off at a cemetery that was midway point between our 2 houses and a great place for underage drinking. We were dropped off there with a 4-pack of Bottless and James wine coolers to split between us. It's an old large cemetery with rolling hills moss, covered headstones and large maple trees too. I grew up playing hide and seek and having BB gun wars there. In fact, I even taught an army buddy how to drive stick in that cemetery. It was never a scary or haunted place to me at all. Even after the weirdest experience of my young life took place there, I still thought of it fondly. Now there was a gazebo where we would sit and drink beers, wine coolers. It was open, aired, with half walls and benches to sit on while we chatted and drank. All we had between us was that one full pack. So we were not drunk or under the influence of anything else, but we began hearing footsteps coming in our direction. They sounded like somebody was walking on leaves. It later occurred to me that was the first thing. That was odd, as the leaves were still on the trees and the cemetery was pretty well maintained. "Cops," Joe hissed, and I answered. "Kids, the footsteps." They came closer. We couched below the half wall facing each other, the smiles on our faces growing more and more nervous, until they disappeared altogether. The footsteps came at a measured pace. No, the sound accompanied them. No jingling of keys. No fabric brushing against each other. And there was also no beam of a flashlight flitting about. The footsteps kept coming, though I could see my mounting fear echoed in Joe's face. But before we'd crouched down, we tried to see who was walking toward us. And we really couldn't. But that was to be expected. To be honest, it was a moonless night with little ambient light available. With our eyes wide and mouths agape, the footsteps came all the way up to the other side of that half wall and stopped. Joe visibly sagged and I began to shake, as neither one of us had the courage to look up at what had to be surely someone peering down on us. The footsteps. They then began to recede and we popped up immediately to see who it was. And when we did, there was nobody there, literally nobody. I mean, we could hear or sort of see what the footsteps were coming from, but there just wasn't anybody making them. It was dark, but it wasn't pitch black, and we surely would have seen someone there. We definitely would have at least seen the silhouette of a person now, they ducking behind tombstones. We followed the steps a little ways down the hill until they stopped, and at that we took that as our cue to leave, and we both sprinted home. The next day at school we allowed that. It was weird. And well, that was that. We didn't tell anyone, and we just sort of went on with our lives. Like I said, we weren't drunk or stoned. Neither of us had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and being outside like that, I seriously doubt it was a carbon monoxide problem, really. I just had no explanation for this, and I don't expect anyone else to either. The 80s were a magical time, and I guess some days they just contained a little more magic than others. When I was in primary school, we used to go on school trips to a place called Marin's Hill in Surrey, UK. Marin's Hill is an adventure center that mainly caters to schools. They have activities like climbing, orienteering, canoeing, etc., and they had dorms to stay as well. We usually went for like 4 or 5 days. The place sits on 45 acres of land, and there's really no reason to be there other than the above. I believe they also have a part for adults, for team building trips and stuff like that. But they're certainly not together. So we'd only ever see employees, or sometimes kids, from a different school. While there, then one evening we were camping out. For the night, a Margins Hill employee led us to the camping area at about 7 p.m., helped show us all how to set up our tents and start a fire, and then left for the night, leaving us in the care of 2 of our teachers from school. We had a fire going, and we were all sitting around it on logs that were placed around the fire area. We were singing songs and talking and just being kids as it got darker after a while. A couple of us heard the sound of somebody approaching, but I didn't think too much of it, probably just an employee checking in. Suddenly, though, this G appears out of the darkness and loudly says, "You shouldn't be here." Everyone whips their head around to see who it was, and this guy was just sort of standing there. He's a big guy, looked homeless in that he had a big scraggly beard and hair. But he's wearing a suit with Wellington boots and is holding the plastic bag. But one of our teachers says to the guy, "It's okay. We're booked in for a few days. We're from this school." The guy looks around for a few seconds, like he's checking behind himself, and then repeats, "You shouldn't be here," but louder. The male teacher that was with us jumps up and positions himself between the guy and us kids very quickly and repeats that we are supposed to be here, and asks the man who he is. while at the same time grabbing him by the arm to sort of lead him away. The strange guy pulls his arm away aggressively, then walks off real quickly without saying another word. Though a bit later all of the kids are in their tents. To do a tent. The teachers are still sat outside, probably enjoying some child's free time, when we hear some shouting. It sounded to me like, "Don't get out." A few of us open our tents and I could just about see the same guy standing there in the darkness. Our teacher is already right by the guy at that point and shouts at him to leave, but the guy is just sort of looking at him. So the teacher starts to gently push him back away from us and is saying something to the guy. While doing so, they disappear into the darkness of the surrounding area for maybe 30 seconds. Then my teacher comes back and, with a look of urgency, says, "We're going back to the dorms right now." No idea what was said, but my teacher's whole demeanor had changed. Suddenly, we all leave our tents bitched and we walk the 10 minutes or so back to the dorms by torchlight. Once we're in the dorm, the teachers go off to speak to an employee, and about 15 minutes later we see a police car pull up by the reception area and the police talk to my teacher. That guy had absolutely no reason to be on that 45 acres of land. Thank you so much for joining me in the world of Midnight Dark Stories. I hope these tales have sent shivers down your spine and sparked your imagination. Remember to subscribe, like, and share your scariest thoughts in the comments. Until the next time we meet in the darkness, keep the thrill alive.